My hands still remember the cold, not the chill of a winter morning, but the deep, metallic cold of steel bars, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes a home in your soul. If you'd told me then, in that 6 by 8 foot cell, that one day my hands would be stained with paint instead of grime, that they would create something beautiful enough to hang in a place where people go to feel wonder, I would have laughed in your face. A bitter, broken sound. But here I am. It all started with a single stolen pencil. They'd taken everything from me when I was processed. My clothes, my wallet, my identity. I was given a number. Inmate 78432. That's who I was. That's all I was. The days bled into one another, a monotonous grey smear of routine, of shouted orders, of the constant low hum of fear and anger. I was drowning in it. The noise outside was nothing compared to the noise inside my own head, a screaming chorus of regret, of shame, of a future that had been slammed shut and bolted closed. I was in the hole, solitary confinement, for a fight I didn't start but finished. 23 hours a day in a concrete box. No window, just a slit in the steel door for a tray of food. The silence in the hole is the loudest sound you will ever hear. It's a vacuum that sucks out all hope. That's when I found it. A small chewed-up pencil stub, hidden in a crack in the concrete floor, left by God knows who. A secret, a treasure. I hid it in my palm like it was a diamond. For days, I didn't do anything with it. Just held it. It was a piece of the outside world, a tool for creating, not destroying. One afternoon, driven by a madness I can't explain, I started to scratch. On the wall, next to my cot. I didn't have a plan. I just let my hand move. A line. A curve. I was trying to remember my mother's face, the way she'd smile at me when I was a boy, before I'd messed it all up. The graphite was weak, the concrete was rough, but something began to take shape. It wasn't good. It was clumsy. The proportions were all wrong. But in that distorted, grey sketch, I saw her. For the first time in years, I saw something other than the four walls closing in on me. I saw love. I started to cry. Not the angry, frustrated tears I was used to, but deep, heaving sobs that cleansed something inside me. In that moment, I wasn't inmate number 78432. I was a son. I was a boy remembering his mother's love. That pencil stub was my key. Not to freedom, but to myself. When I got out of the hole, the obsession began. I traded my commissary, cigarettes, stamps, the little chocolate bars that were our currency, for more pencils. For paper. I drew on the back of legal forms, on napkins, on anything I could find. I drew the faces of the men around me, capturing the hardness in their eyes, the sorrow in the set of their mouths. I drew the view from my cell's tiny, barred window, just a sliver of sky, but I tried to capture every cloud, every shade of blue and grey. The other inmates, they started to take notice. The tough guys, the gang leaders, the lost souls. They'd come to me, quietly. "Hey man, can you draw my daughter? I got a photo. Can you draw my old neighborhood?" I became the prison artist. It was a strange, unspoken respect. In a place that sought to strip us of all humanity, my drawings were a rebellion. They were proof that we were still men, that we still had memories, people we loved, a past that was more than just the crime that defined us. But the true test wasn't inside those walls. The true test was waiting for me on the outside. The day I walked out, a duffel bag in my hand and $200 in my pocket, the world didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a bigger, more complicated prison. The sky was too wide, the sounds were too loud, and everyone I met, I could see the question in their eyes the moment they looked at me, the moment I had to check that box on the job application. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? The answer was a door slamming shut. Again and again and again. We'll call you. They never did. I was free, but I was more trapped than ever. The ghost of my old life was a chain around my ankle. I was an ex-con, a former inmate, an ex-presidiario, a label that was like a brand on my forehead. Who would ever see the man I was trying to become? Who would ever see the artist? Who would be willing to give a second chance to someone like me? Hey, this story is touching you right there on your side of the screen, isn't it? Putting yourself in the shoes of someone who lost everything and fought for a second chance is one of the most human things there is. If you connected with this journey, do me a crucial favor. Comment on which state you're watching from and tell me what moment in the story touched your heart the most. That way, I know you're connected to our mission of spreading stories of redemption and believing that everyone deserves a chance to start over. And listen to this. The vast majority of people who are moved by these stories aren't yet subscribed to the channel. If you believe in second chances, I invite you to subscribe now. It's completely free, and you'll continue to receive the most profound stories of human transformation straight to your feed. Also, remember that at the end of this video, you'll find other incredible journeys of new beginnings on your screen. The world outside was a different kind of confinement. The walls were invisible, but they were there, built from sideways glances, the tightening of a smile when I walked into a room, the silent, swift judgment that followed me like a shadow. I got a job, not a good one. Washing dishes in the steamy, greasy back room of a diner. The pay was a pittance, but it was cash, and it didn't ask questions. I rented a room in a boarding house that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. The walls were thin, and I could hear the muffled sounds of other broken lives. This was my freedom. A small, shabby room, a job that left my hands raw and my spirit numb. I was free to be hungry, free to be lonely, free to be nobody. At night, the only thing that kept me sane was the sketchbook I'd bought with my first week's pay. It was cheap, the paper was rough, but it was mine. Under the dim glow of a single bare bulb, I would draw. I drew the memories of my cell. I drew the faces of the men I'd left behind. I drew the feeling of being caged in a world that pretended to be open. The art that had been my escape in prison was now my confession, my testimony, my scream into the void. But a scream no one heard is just a whisper, and I was tired of whispering. One afternoon, walking home from the diner, I saw a flyer taped to a lamppost. It was weathered, curling at the edges. Community Art Show, it read. Open to all local artists. Submit your work. There was an address for a small gallery downtown. My heart did a strange, painful leap in my chest. A gallery. A real gallery. For 3 days, I walked around with that flyer folded in my pocket, the paper soft from my nervous handling. Open to all local artists. Was I an artist? Or was I just an ex-con with a hobby? The voice in my head, the one that had been forged in prison and honed by rejection, was loud. They'll take one look at you and throw you out. They'll see the felon, not the art. But the memory of that pencil stub in the hole was louder. It was a tiny, persistent flame in the wind. What do you have to lose? It whispered. You've already lost everything. I chose 3 pieces. A portrait of an old inmate named Elijah, his eyes holding a lifetime of quiet sorrow. A detailed drawing of my cell, from the perspective of my bunk, capturing the oppressive geometry of the space. And one I'd called The Key, which was just a drawing of that first chewed-up pencil stub, rendered with so much care. It looked like a holy relic. I rolled them up carefully, my hands trembling. I put on my only clean shirt, a thrift store button-down that was still too stiff. and I walked to the address on the flyer. The gallery was small but bright, with white walls and a polished concrete floor. A young woman with colorful tattoos snaking up her arms was behind a desk, typing on a computer. She looked up and smiled. "Can I help you?" My throat was dry. I felt like I was about to commit a crime. I'm I'm here for the art show." I held out the rolled-up drawings like they were a bomb. "Awesome! Just fill out this form," she said, her smile never faltering. She handed me a clipboard. The form was simple: name, address, contact info, title of works, and then, at the bottom, a line that froze my blood. Brief bio. Optional. Optional. The word felt like a trap. If I left it blank, maybe I had a chance. If I told the truth, it was over. I stood there, pen hovering over the paper. I saw my mother's face from my drawing on the cell wall. I saw the respect in the eyes of the inmates who'd asked for my help. Was I still hiding? Was I still inmate number 78432? Or was I the man who had found his soul in a piece of graphite? My hand moved. I didn't write a bio. I wrote a confession. The art I am submitting was created during and after a 7-year incarceration. It is a record of a journey from a place of no hope to a fragile search for redemption. This is all I have to offer the world. I handed the clipboard back to the woman, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't wait for her to read it. I just turned and walked out, the bell on the door jingling behind me, a sound of finality. I walked all the way home, the weight of what I'd done pressing me into the pavement. I had been a fool. I had just signed my own rejection letter. A week passed, then 2. I stopped checking my cheap, prepaid phone for messages. I went to work. I came home. I drew. The hope, that tiny, treacherous flame, had been snuffed out. This was my life. I had to accept it. And then, one rainy Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. "Hello, is this—" It was the woman's voice from the gallery. She sounded different, softer. "I'm calling about your submission for the community show." This was it. The polite, professional letdown. "Yes," I said, my voice flat. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her take a breath. I read your bio. I've been looking at your pieces for 2 weeks. I can't stop looking at them." I said nothing. I couldn't. "They're powerful," she continued, her voice gaining strength, filling with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "They're heartbreaking and beautiful. We've decided. We want to give your work its own wall, a featured space. We want to call the exhibit Second Sight." I sank out onto the edge of my bed, the world tilting around me. The rain tapped against my window. It sounded like applause. "Hello? Are you still there?" she asked. "Yes," I managed to whisper. "I'm here." "There's just one thing," she said. "The bio you wrote, we'd like to use it, on the placard, next to your work. My secret, my shame, laid bare for everyone to see. My first instinct was to say no, to hide, to protect the fragile new identity I was building. But then I thought of the men still inside, their faces etched in my memory. I thought of anyone else out there, carrying the weight of a past mistake, feeling like they were forever defined by their worst moment. If my story, my truth, could be a key for someone else, just like that pencil stub had been for me, then how could I possibly hide it? "Okay," I said, the word feeling like a vow. "Use it." That phone call was the sound of a door, one I thought was welded shut, creaking open. A sliver of light, cutting through the darkness of my world. It was the moment my second chance began. The gallery was brighter than I remembered, and louder. The opening night for Second Sight was a whirlwind of polished floors, clinking glasses, and a low hum of conversation that felt entirely alien. I stood in the corner, my cheap button-down shirt feeling like a costume. I was a ghost at my own funeral, or perhaps my own resurrection. My three drawings were mounted on a central wall, stark and powerful under the focused gallery lights. And next to them, for all the world to see, was the small placard with my bio. My confession. People would stop, a glass of wine in hand, their casual chatter dying as they read the words. I saw their expressions change. Curiosity turned to surprise, then to a quiet, sober contemplation. They weren't just looking at art. They were looking through a window into a world they'd only ever seen in movies. They were seeing the humanity inside the monster they'd been taught to fear. I saw a well-dressed man with silver hair stare at the portrait of Elijah for a long, long time. His wife tugged at his arm, but he didn't move. He was lost in the lines of Elijah's face, in the story of sorrow held in those graphite eyes. I saw a young woman wipe a tear away as she read the description of the key. They weren't seeing an ex-con. In that moment, they were seeing a person. And then she walked over to me, the gallery director, the woman from the phone. Her name was Anya. Up close, her eyes were a startling shade of green, and they held none of the pity or fear I'd braced myself for. They held respect. "They can feel it, you know," she said softly, gesturing with her chin towards the small crowd around my work. "They can feel the truth in it. It's raw. It's uncomfortable. And it's magnificent." I just nodded, my throat too tight for words. "An artist doesn't just create with skill," she continued, her voice low, "meant just for me. An artist creates with their life. Every line, every shadow. It's a piece of their story. You didn't hide your story. You offered it. And that is the most courageous act an artist can make." Her words washed over me, a balm on a wound I'd thought was permanent. Courageous. She'd called me courageous. Not a monster, not a criminal, an artist. The rest of the night was a blur of hesitant handshakes and murmured compliments. A local newspaper reporter interviewed me, his recorder capturing my halting, nervous answers. I went home that night feeling like I was floating, the scent of wine and perfume clinging to my clothes, a strange and wonderful new scent of a world I'd never been allowed to enter. The next morning, I was back at the diner, up to my elbows in greasy, soapy water. The magic of the gallery felt a million miles away. But then, Carlos, the grizzled old cook, slapped the morning newspaper down on the stainless steel counter next to me. "This, you kid," he grunted. There, on the arts page, was a picture of me standing next to my drawings. The headline read, "From Incarceration to Inspiration, a local artist's powerful second chance." I stared at my own face, at the caption that read, "Artist." The word looked foreign, like it belonged to someone else. But it was there, in print, for everyone to see. That article was the pebble that started the avalanche. Anya called again. A small, private museum across the city had seen the piece. They were interested. They wanted to know if I had more work. They wanted to offer me a spot in a group exhibition focusing on art from the margins. My heart hammered again, but this time it was a drumbeat of excitement, not fear. I did have more work. I had stacks of drawings, piles of sketches filled with the ghosts of my past. I worked every night after my shifts, fueled by a hope that now felt like a tangible thing. I started to paint. Anya gave me some old acrylics she had, and I experimented clumsily at first, covering canvases I built from scrap wood with the colors of my memory. The gray of the concrete, the faded blue of prison uniforms, the stark white of a solitary confinement cell, and then, slowly, the vibrant, impossible green of a leaf I remembered from a tree outside the prison fence. The group show at the museum was bigger. The walls were taller, the lights were brighter. My section was no longer just 3 drawings. It was a whole story, a narrative arc of darkness searching for light. And people came. They read my story on the wall, and they looked at my art. And they didn't look away in disgust. They leaned in. They were captivated. A critic wrote that my work possessed a brutal, unvarnished honesty that challenged the viewer to reconsider the very nature of redemption. I had to look up some of those words, but when I did, I felt a quiet pride settle deep in my bones. I was no longer just the artist who had been to prison. I was becoming an artist, period. The ex-con part of my story was becoming a chapter, not the whole book. The diner gave me a raise, then eventually they let me go with a small party when the art started to sell. My hands, once raw from dishwater, were now permanently stained with paint, a badge of honor. It was a whirlwind of creation and recognition, a life I could never have dreamed of in my darkest hours. But success, I was learning, was a new kind of test. It was easy to be the angry, marginalized voice from the outside. Now that I was being let in, what did I have to say? The fear of being a fraud, a one-trick pony whose only trick was his criminal past, began to creep in. The applause was intoxicating, but the silence that followed was deafening. Who was I without the struggle? Was this my redemption, or was I just building a more beautiful cage? The museum walls were a different kind of quiet, not the oppressive silence of the cell, but a hushed, respectful one, the kind that made the rustle of your own clothes sound too loud. My work was no longer in a corner, it had its own room. Penitence and pigment, they called the exhibition. Every time I walked in and saw my paintings, large, chaotic canvases where I'd used crushed charcoal from the prison yard mixed with oils, where the brushstrokes were sometimes made with my fingers, even my fists, I felt a jolt of disbelief. This was my rage, my sorrow, my fragile hope, hanging in a place where people came to be moved by beauty. They were seeing the ugliness of my past and calling it art. The money started to change things. Not a lot, but enough. I moved out of the boarding house. I rented a small studio with north-facing windows, a space that smelled of turpentine and possibility instead of despair and stale cigarettes. For the first time since I was a boy, I had a place that was truly mine, a sanctuary. I could work through the night if the muse struck, the city lights twinkling outside my window like a galaxy of second chances. But with the quiet came the noise in my head, the fear. It was a sly, insidious voice that waited for me in the dark hours before dawn. They don't love your art, it whispered. They love your story. The ex-con who paints. It's a novelty, a trend. What happens when they get bored? What will you paint when you've run out of prison memories? I'd stare at a blank canvas, the whiteness accusing me. The struggle had been my fuel. The fight for a meal, for a pencil, for a sliver of respect in a world that denied me all of it, that had been the fire in my belly. Now, the fire was banked. I had full meals, endless supplies, and the respect of people who used words like juxtaposition and visceral vernacular. I was comfortable. And comfort, I was terrified to discover, felt like a kind of death for an artist like me. I tried to force it. I painted scenes from my new life, the view from my studio window, a still life of my coffee cup and paintbrushes. But the results were flat, lifeless. They lacked the raw, screaming truth of my earlier work. The critic who had loved my brutal honesty would surely pan this as domesticated and derivative. I was losing my voice just as the world was starting to listen. The invitations started to come. To give talks at art colleges, to mentor at-risk youth. I said no to all of them. The thought of standing in front of a room full of bright-eyed students, Their futures a blank, pristine canvas filled me with a panic I couldn't name. What wisdom did I have? Go to prison, kids. It'll give you great material? My story wasn't a lesson plan. It was a wound that had scabbed over into something people found interesting to look at. Anya noticed the change in me. She came by the studio one afternoon, finding me staring at a blank canvas, a cup of cold coffee in my hand. "You're stuck," she said, not as an accusation, but a simple statement of fact. "I have nothing left to say," I replied, the words tasting like ash. She walked over to the one piece I hadn't been able to finish. It was a mess of dark colors, a painting I'd started and abandoned a dozen times. "That's not true. You're just afraid of what you have to say now." Hurt, she turned to me, her green eyes piercing. "You think your only truth is in the pain, that the redemption part of the story is less valid, less artistic." I looked away, out the window. She was right. I was clinging to the identity of the wounded man, the angry inmate, because it was safe. It was a known quantity. Who was I as a man who was, by all appearances, succeeding? I didn't know how to paint that man. I didn't know if he was worth painting. "The man who survived that," she said, gesturing to my older works leaning against the wall, "is the same man standing here now. His journey didn't end when he got the key to this studio. The canvas isn't asking for your past, Leo. It's asking for your present, your now. And your now is complicated. It's scary. It's full of a new kind of fear. Paint that." After she left, her words echoed in the quiet studio. "Paint your now." I looked at the failed, dark painting. I looked at the blank canvas. And then I did something I hadn't done since I was in the hole. I stopped trying to create a picture. I started to create a feeling. I picked up a thick brush and loaded it with a violent, bloody red. I slashed it across the pristine white. I didn't think. I felt. I felt the terror of this new success, the fear of being exposed as a fraud, the crushing weight of their expectations. I used my hands, smearing the red, mixing in a sickly, anxious yellow, the color of a warning light. I carved into the wet paint with the end of my brush, creating scars in the surface. It was ugly. It was chaotic. It was a mess. But it was honest. When I finally stepped back, my chest heaving, my hands covered in paint, I saw it. It wasn't a picture of a cell or a face. It was a portrait of my fear. The fear of peace. The terror of a second chance. It was the most vulnerable thing I had ever created. I didn't know if it was good. I didn't know if anyone would understand it. But for the first time in months, the noise in my head was quiet. The blank canvas was no longer an accusation. It was an invitation. And I had finally accepted. The journey wasn't about escaping the past. It was about having the courage to build a future, one messy, terrifying, and honest brushstroke at a time. The art wasn't in the pain, or in the redemption. It was in the relentless, human struggle to bridge the gap between the two. The invitation came on thick, cream-colored paper, the kind that feels expensive just to touch. It was from the National Gallery of Art. They wanted to acquire the key, the drawing of that first chewed-up pencil stub. They didn't just want it for their archives. They wanted it for their permanent collection, to be displayed in a new wing dedicated to art of resilience. On my little piece of stolen hope, born in the darkest hole, was going to hang in one of the most hallowed halls of art in the country. I should have been elated. This was the pinnacle, the ultimate validation. Instead, a cold dread settled in my stomach. This felt final. Like the last page of a book everyone had loved, and now they were closing it, the story neatly tied up. The ex-con who made good, a perfect redemptive arc. But my life wasn't an arc. It was a messy, ongoing line, and I was terrified of what came after the happy ending. The day of the acquisition ceremony arrived. I wore a suit for the first time in my life. It felt like a costume. The National Gallery was a cathedral of art, all marble and echoing whispers. The air itself felt important, heavy with the weight of centuries of genius. I felt like an imposter, a graffiti artist who had accidentally stumbled into the Vatican. They had the key displayed in a glass case, lit with a single perfect beam of light. It looked small, fragile, insignificant next to the grand, sweeping canvases in the adjoining rooms. A crowd of patrons, critics, and dignitaries mingled, sipping champagne. They were all here for the story, the fairy tale. An older man, his suit impeccably tailored, his hair a regal silver, approached me. He introduced himself as Robert, a member of the museum's board. He had kind eyes, but they held the polished sheen of a life lived in privilege. "A remarkable journey, Mr. Valdez," he said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. "Truly inspiring. To think this all started with that." He gestured towards the humble pencil stub in its pristine case. "It proves that art can flourish in the most unexpected places." He meant it as a compliment, but it felt like a dismissal. My pain, my struggle, my entire transformation was being reduced to a charming anecdote, a testament to the human spirit's amusing ability to create trinkets from trash. I was the unexpected place. I smiled, nodded, and felt the walls of this beautiful, gilded cage closing in. The director of the museum called for everyone's attention. She gave a speech about the power of redemption, about how art can transcend circumstance. She spoke about my work with words like raw, unflinching, and powerful. And then she said the words that sealed the knot in my chest. Leo Valdez's story is a testament to the fact that it's never too late for a second chance, that from the deepest darkness, the most brilliant light can emerge. The crowd applauded. It was a warm, generous sound, and it smothered me. She then gestured for me to come to the podium. I hadn't prepared a speech. I had been told I wouldn't have to give one. This was a trap. I walked to the microphone, my heart thundering. The lights were blinding. I looked out at the sea of expectant, smiling faces. They were waiting for the happy ending. They were waiting for me to be grateful, to validate their belief in this neat, clean narrative. I gripped the sides of the podium, my knuckles white. The room fell silent. "Thank you," I began, my voice hoarse. It echoed in the vast space. I looked down, then back up, my eyes finding Anya's in the crowd. She gave me a small, encouraging nod. "You're all very kind," I continued. "But I think there's been a misunderstanding." A faint ripple of confusion went through the audience. "You keep talking about my story as if it's over," I said, the words coming faster now, fueled by a sudden, fierce honesty. As if the moment I picked up that pencil, the darkness was defeated. As if my second chance was a door I walked through and then closed behind me. I paused, letting the silence hang. It's not like that. A second chance isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a burden you carry. It's the terrifying weight of knowing you've been given something you don't deserve, and the constant, gut-wrenching fear that you're going to mess it up. Every day. Every single day, I'm afraid. I could see the shock on some faces. This wasn't in the script. This drawing, I pointed towards the key, in its case. It wasn't a key that unlocked a door to a brighter future. It was a key that unlocked the door to myself. And behind that door wasn't just light. There was more darkness. There was shame and regret and a fear of this, of all of this, that sometimes feels even more paralyzing than the walls of my cell ever were. My voice broke. The light you see in my work, it's not a brilliant, emerging light. It's a flicker, a single stubborn match struck in a hurricane, and some days the wind almost blows it out. That's the truth. That's the real story. It's not over. It's never over. The work of redemption isn't a one-time event. It's a daily battle, and some days I'm not sure I'm winning. I stopped out of breath. The applause didn't come immediately. There was a profound, stunned silence. And then it started. Not a roaring, celebratory applause, but something slower, deeper, more thoughtful. It was the sound of understanding, not just celebration. Afterwards, as the crowd began to disperse, an elderly woman approached me. Her eyes were bright with tears. She took my hand in both of hers. Her skin was paper thin. "My son," she whispered, her voice trembling. He's he's in a place like you were. I sent him your articles. He started to draw. Thank you. Thank you for not making it sound easy." In that moment, standing in the heart of the establishment, having just rejected their perfect narrative, I finally felt like I belonged. Not because I had been redeemed in their eyes, but because I had been honest. And in that honesty, I had found my true purpose. It wasn't to be a symbol of finished redemption. It was to be a companion to those still fighting their way through the long, dark night. My art wasn't a trophy from a conquered past. It was a map of the ongoing, messy, and beautifully human struggle to become. The silence after the speech was a living thing. It stretched, thick and heavy in the marble hall. I saw the museum director's frozen smile, the board members' raised eyebrow. I had thrown a rock into their perfectly still pond, but then, as that slow, deep applause built, something in the room shifted. The air changed. It was no longer the formal, distant atmosphere of a ceremony. It had become something more human, more connected. People didn't rush to leave. They lingered. They came up to me, not with polished congratulations, but with quiet, earnest words. A man in a simple jacket, his hands calloused, told me his brother was inside. A young woman, her face pale with anxiety, confessed she felt like a fraud in her own life, terrified of the success she had worked so hard for. They weren't seeing the artist in the suit anymore. They were seeing a fellow traveler. Anya found me later, standing alone by a massive window overlooking the city. The lights twinkled, each one a story, a struggle. "You burned the script," she said, a small, proud smile playing on her lips. "I think I did," I replied, the adrenaline finally receding, leaving a strange, hollowed-out peace. "Good," she said simply. "It was a bad script. What you said in there, that's the real work. That's the art that matters." The reviews the next day were mixed. One critic called my speech a jarring, self-indulgent disruption of an otherwise elegant evening, but another in a major publication wrote, "In a world hungry for clean, redemptive arcs, Leo Valdez offered a more profound truth, that salvation is not a state of being but a daily practice." His art, and now his words, remind us that the most beautiful and resilient growth often occurs in the cracked and broken places, not after they are repaired. That piece, the second one, sparked a different kind of avalanche. It wasn't about the ex-con who painted anymore. It was about the artist exploring the ongoing psychology of a fractured life trying to heal. Invitations started to come again, but they were different this time. Not just from art colleges, but from the psychology conferences, from community centers working with returning citizens. They didn't want a motivational speaker, they wanted a witness. I said yes. The first talk I gave was at a state penitentiary. Walking back through those gates, this time with a visitor's pass clipped to my suit jacket, was a surreal, out-of-body experience. The smell was the same. The sound of the heavy doors slamming shut was the same. But I was different. I stood in a room filled with men in jumpsuits, their faces a familiar mosaic of anger, defiance, and a deep, hidden despair. I didn't give them a pep talk. I didn't tell them they could be like me. I showed them my new work, the messy, chaotic paintings about the fear of success, the terror of freedom, the paralyzing weight of a second chance. Everyone on the outside talks about the struggle to get out, I told them, my voice echoing in the quiet room. Nobody tells you about the struggle that waits for you when you do. They want you to be grateful. They want you to be fixed. But you're not a machine. You're a person. And the same demons that followed you in here, they get paroled with you. I saw heads nod. I saw eyes, once guarded, soften with recognition. This, I said, pointing to a painting of a figure standing at the edge of a bright, overwhelming abyss, is what it feels like some days. It's not a happy painting, but it's an honest one. And that honesty, that's the only thing that has ever saved me. Don't let anyone tell you your story is over. Don't let them put a pretty bow on it. Your story is yours, and it's messy, and it's hard, and it's the most valuable thing you own. Worse, afterwards, a big man with teardrops tattooed on his face waited until the others had left. He shuffled up to me, his eyes on the floor. "Hey man," he mumbled, "that picture, the one with the abyss, I feel that. Every night." He looked up, and his eyes were shining. "I got out for 6 months last year. Couldn't handle it. Came back on a violation. It was easier in here." My heart broke for him. I understood him completely. "It is easier," I said softly. "The hard part is choosing the hard thing. Every single day." He just nodded, a world of understanding passing between us. In that moment, I knew my purpose had crystallized. The museums were a platform, but this connection, this shared, unvarnished truth, was the mission. The work in my studio transformed. The pressure was gone. I was no longer painting for critics or for a narrative. I was painting for that man. I was painting for the woman afraid of her own success, for the mother of the lost son. My canvases became dialogues. They were questions, not answers. They explored the geography of a mind, learning to live with its own scars. I used materials from my new life, bits of newspaper headlines about my own story, shreds of the expensive suit I'd worn to the National Gallery, mixed with the charcoal from the prison yard. It was all part of the collage, the past and the present, forever entangled. One evening, as I was cleaning my brushes, the setting sun painting my studio in hues of gold and orange, I realized the fear was still there. The voice of doubt still whispered. But it no longer controlled me. It had become just another color on my palette, another part of the human experience I could acknowledge, accept, and maybe one day even make peace with. The journey wasn't from the cell to the museum. It was from hiding to being seen. And I was finally, truly allowing myself to be seen. Not as a symbol, but as a man. Flawed, fearful, and still fighting. And in that, I found a freedom far greater than any I had ever imagined. The biggest twist in my story wasn't that I became a successful artist. It was what I finally understood about that very success. For years, I thought the goal was to escape my past, to build a new identity so shiny that the old one would disappear. I was wrong. The real redemption came when I stopped running. It came in a plain white envelope, delivered to my studio. There was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a pencil drawing. It was a portrait of me, but not as I am now. It was a drawing of me as a young man, from my intake photo at the prison, my eyes hollow, my face a mask of shame and defiance. The drawing was good, hauntingly good, but it was the note scribbled at the bottom that made my world stop spinning. "You were the key for me too. I was in the hole after you, I found your drawing of your mother on the wall. I started drawing the next day. I got out 6 months ago. I'm working. I'm clean. Thank you for not cleaning the wall. It was unsigned. I sat there, holding that drawing, tears streaming down my face. All this time, I'd been searching for my purpose in museums and accolades. But my greatest impact, my most important work, wasn't hanging in a gallery under a spotlight. It was a faint, scratched drawing on a concrete wall in a solitary confinement cell, a message in a bottle passed from one lost soul to another. The circle was complete. The redemption wasn't just mine. It was a chain, a whisper passed in the dark, a single match used to light another. And in that moment, I knew my story was no longer just my own. It was a part of a vast, silent, and beautiful tapestry of second chances, woven one fragile human connection at a time.